Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me today on my festive tech calendar talk. I'm Alec Harrison, a consultant at Lean Techniques. I'm an Azure nerd, Microsoft MVP. I have a podcast here with my friend Brian Gorman. We also do Azure Cloud workshops. So we took some of the Microsoft Cloud workshops, kind of updated them, put on a new hat of try to keep them as cheap and easy to run as possible. That way, if you don't have an Azure subscription, you can still learn potentially without doing any sort of major spending or anything crazy. I also run the Iowa Microsoft Azure user group and the Kansas City Azure user group. We have some rebranding going on there right now, but if you check out our pages, we do have an AI workshop we're putting on January 10th, as well as a talk by Scott Hanselman. So it should be super exciting there. There is hybrid options. So if you're not local to Omaha or Des Moines, it's hybrid. So you can feel free to tune in if you want to jump in for the workshop or just jump in general to hear Hanselman talk. And then there should be hopefully some networking opportunities. If you need to reach out to me, either professionally or personally, about anything in this talk, feel free to reach out to me or add me on LinkedIn. Always happy to connect with people. And yeah. So with an AI overview, I feel like we kind of need to start from the beginning of why we should even care about AI, why Azure Open AI, I personally believe, is better than other products. We'll walk through Azure Open AI as it sits today. Is it really that cool? Being an Azure nerd, I think you might know which way my opinion is swaying, but we'll go through there and I'll try to convince you as well. We'll do a basic sample and then we'll do a more enterprise data sample. So if you're unfamiliar with this concept, this is a Wordly map. It's kind of broken up into 4 different sections, and a lot of technology kind of follows this pattern. You have the genesis where people are like guessing that these new things are going to be invented. Think of like blockchain 10 years ago, right? Like the people who are doing the theoretical, can this even happen? Doing their master's thesis and PhD documentation, all about like this thing is kind of possible. Then you have the custom. Think of the people who are building like their large language models before Chat GPT and OpenAI. Those are the people, we need machine learning because we have a use case. They're hiring experts in the field. So, you have your data scientists who are then going to build and train your model and really level it up. And you're investing a lot of time and resources, and you're having to find kind of the best of the best in that field to continue to build your custom stuff. Everything's one-off. Everything is built just for you. But with that comes the cost of that. Then you kind of have the product. So that is kind of where your OpenAI falls today, Chat GPT, where it's a standalone product, right? You're going to it, you're trying to use it because that's what you came here to use, is that product itself. Think of your like Office 365, your this app, StreamYard, right? I came to StreamYard because I liked that it could do the apps for me, all built in. I pay a fee for it. It lets me do what I need to do. Same with Office 365. I need to do my email. I need to do Word. I go to that because it's productized. It's there. It's a product. It does what I need it to do. Then you have commodity, which is kind of like utility. It's hidden behind the scenes, right? So in the way that today you don't really buy a Word engine or a text editor with autocomplete, right? Like your Word, your Google Docs, you expect those all to have like spell check, right? Well, spell check at one point used to be a feature. You used to be able to buy additional things for IDEs and whatnot to do those kind of things. Now they're kind of commoditized, right? You would be upset if your IDE doesn't have spell check or linting or some of these things that just happen behind the scenes because they're a commodity now. You don't expect them to be there. Same way that when you go to Netflix, you expect there to be a search box that works, right? You're not paying for Elasticsearch or whatever Azure Cognitive Search, whatever it's using behind the scenes. You're not paying for that product. You're paying for the commodity and just kind of expect it to work there behind the scenes, when a roundabout way you're kind of paying for it, but a little bit different thing. So like when you have a chat bot is another good example. When you're trying to get help with something on, say, like an airline because your ticket or plane was canceled or delayed, when you reach out, you're not paying to use that service. It's just a commodity that they can get back to you and maybe help you reschedule your flight without talking to anybody and that kind of thing. Why do we even care about this? So the reason I drew this is, in my opinion, the two big clouds that I always hear people talking about is Azure versus Amazon. I think today, as it sits, Azure is right here with their OpenAI offering, where you have your OpenAI product. It's a standalone product you can pay for. You could have people go out and type in their questions and get it answered. And I think they're also in the commodity space, right? You have your Copilot X. You have your all the other copilots rolling out in these other products where the chat feature is kind of becoming a commodity, right? You're expecting it to just be there. You're expecting it to work as it should. You're not expecting to have to do a ton of crazy things. Amazon is kind of still in this space. I've heard rumors that they're beta testing their competitor to Chat GPT and OpenAI. I don't think it's out in the general market yet. I'm not an Amazon guy, so I could be totally off as well. But they do have today, and Azure does have custom as well. But I feel like that's kind of been the iteration of these cloud platforms. They started in the custom space, and that's what a lot of these other things are built on top of. Is you start in your custom space. All right, how do we commoditize this now that it can help the most amount of people? Not saying you can't go and build a custom LLM large language model in Azure. You can, but there's probably better and cheaper and more effective ways to grab one that's off the shelf, supplement it with your data, and an architecture like RAG, which is the retrieval augmentation generation, than it is to build one potentially completely from scratch and having to do that. So all of that to say, I'm sure if you're listening to this talk, there's probably already one direction you're leaning, cloud or not. This probably doesn't sell you on a cloud or not. But if it does, I would say right now, Azure is a little bit in the lead, and Amazon is working their best to close the gap, which I feel like early on in the cloud war, it was the other way around. So it's kind of cool to see Azure be in the lead and now Amazon catching up for feature parity. That's just my own nerdiness, so my opinion. So why is Azure the best AI on the market? Well, you kind of have three main competitors out there for Azure OpenAI competitors as far as the big clouds go. You have OpenAI and Chat GPT. Azure OpenAI, I'm sure I've done this in this talk already. All of these kind of mesh together. Azure OpenAI, Chat GPT, OpenAI in general. What's the difference? Well, you can use Chat GPT out of the box for free. You can go out there and use it, but the biggest caveat there is, and you can also get API access, do a lot of the same feature things as Azure. Your data security is not there. There was a data leak, I believe it was Samsung, that some of their source code, because their engineers use ChatGPT enough, the model actually will retrain on data that is used in ChatGPT, especially the public free-to-use model. So if you're a company that cares about data security and data privacy, you probably don't want to see your source code being leaked out because your developers are using ChatGPT to help write code. So that's going to be a big problem. If you're doing something like Advent of Code or whatever, who cares? But if you're doing something like enterprise data or enterprise software, you probably don't want people to know how the sausage is made all the time. Then you have Bard. Bard is Google's attempt at ChatGPT. It is a pretty solid large language model. It is trained on a much smaller subset of data, and that is done intentionally. And it also is not as great conversationally as OpenAI is. If you ask Bard, at least the last time I did, it will even admit, ChatGPT is a little bit better than it is right now. And they're working to bridge that gap as well. So when you read this or see this, is that still the case? Maybe, maybe not. But they definitely are playing catch up in terms of how do they get as much data as Azure and OpenAI to train their models. And then finally, we have Azure and OpenAI together. So Azure OpenAI. The reason you go for that is your enterprise data. You want to keep your data secure, data security. The only thing that you have to do or give by default out of the box. Sorry, let me take a step back. By default, all of your data is your own. So Azure will keep all of your data within your subscription. It will not go to other users. It will not go to other OpenAI instances. It will stay just strictly in the instance that you're using it in. So it won't go back to feed the model. It won't go back to feed a buddy who also might be working in healthcare or working in manufacturing or working in ag. It won't do that. It'll stay just inside your organization and specifically your OpenAI instance. And it will also allow you RBAC responsibility. So you can do role-based access control. You can govern it, how many people use it. You can govern the rate limits. So you can actually limit within your organization how much you're spending and using on it. And it's just, in my opinion, a much better quality of life experience. You get your API gateways that come with it as well that are also protected. So you can just, in general, I think, do a lot more. And yeah, it's a great tool. The one thing I will say before you do this, if you're listening to this talk and going, man, I really wish I could use this, the best way to do it is go to Azure Open AI. And this link, I used to share this link out. It always ended up being changed 3 or 4 times by the time I sent it out again. So what you'll do is you can come here, how to get access. Right now you still have to apply. And the other thing, I forgot. The other reason you'd want to use Azure is Microsoft only collects data on the prompts you give it, not the answers that come back, to make sure that you aren't abusing their models. But you can even opt out of that. So what that does is it sees if you have any sort of misuse of their models, and we'll talk about it here in a minute. And if it finds it through machine learning and AI, it will trigger a human to manually look at it. But if you think that your data is private enough that you don't even want them to do that, you can actually request to get it applied so that that won't even happen. So what you'll do is you'll come into here and fill out this form. You do it on a subscription by subscription basis. I will say this email address right here, it has to be a company email address. I do think if you have, it just needs to be a managed email. So a private Gmail won't work, but if you're paying for a managed one, I believe that works. There's something behind the scenes that they can see that they just don't want general public applying for. Company name, street, yada, yada. And then right here, you have to say what models you want. Whisper is a new one. That is the speech-to-text model. So you have your text generation. You can actually, I believe, apply for all of them, assuming you're not an MVP, because I think you can do all of them but one. So if you're not an MVP applying for this, oh, I guess it's all of them, but yeah, all of them but one. Oh, weird. Apparently that includes MVPs too. Interesting. No, you got them all except MVP. Anyway, so it's just the different use cases. You have to tell them kind of what use cases you're planning to use it for. You can just pick all of them. That's what I've done just for the sake of protecting myself and making it harder to say I'm not using it in the way I said I would. And then I think I broke something in this form. I think, oh, it's right here. And then there's also DALL-E 2. I believe you can come in here and say what you're planning on using it for. I don't know if I was ever officially approved to use DALL-E. It just kind of showed up one day, and then OpenAI. So again, if you need that, it's a Microsoft Learn link. Just Google Azure OpenAI, and the page kind of looks like this. This format has been fairly similar. It says it's updated here, but this page itself has been around for a while. So we'll jump into our live demo. What we're going to start with is let's start with talking about Cha-Cha. So you may have seen our intro slide about Cha-Cha and the slide. We're not going to be talking about that today. That's a different topic for a different conference. But Cha-Cha was a search engine. Kind of think of, let's go back in time a bit, where we didn't have smartphones quite yet. A lot of people started getting cell phones, and data was supreme. There wasn't Wi-Fi at every Starbucks. You may have had Wi-Fi at your house, and you could use your iPod Touch with that. But for the most part, most people had phones and didn't have data plans. Comes Cha-Cha. More and more people started getting unlimited text versus not quite unlimited data yet, because the cell carriers didn't know how to handle that, or just weren't ready to. So what Cha-Cha was, is it was a phone number that you could send a text to of any question. Think of it like Googling through a text message. And what that would do is it could send a response. It would go off to a human somewhere else. They called them guides. And it would come back with an answer. The start of this talk was I wanted to try to find a use case or reinvent some technology that already existed in my lifetime and try to do it for free. So if you look here in highlighted, Cha-Cha raised over $6 million in development funds, and they had upwards of $5,000 or 5,000 guides is what they called their people who answered questions. And then with 500 people working at any one time. And you can even see they even had equity higher than 6 million at one point. So what does that mean? Well, with Azure Open AI, we can actually solve the same exact problem and do it for free. It costs us nothing. What does that look like? So being the super cheapskate I was and trying to make it truly free, I have a text message here that will go to Twillio. And the reason I use Twillio instead of an Azure service is Twillio gives you, I believe, $25 as an intro credit to not have to do anything, and a phone number. Azure, I think, charges you $2 a month for a registered phone number. So I did it this way. The caveat is it has to be locked down to your cell phone number. So not just anybody can text it, but for the use case of this talk, it was free. So what Twillio will do is it'll get a text. When it receives a text to the phone number it gives you, it has an actual HTTP hook that will go out to a Logic app. It'll post there, go to Azure Open AI, come back, go to Twillio, and answer the prompt. So before we dig into that too much, Twillio isn't really super exciting. Let's actually dig into Azure Open AI service and get a high-level overview of that to know kind of what we're working with. Let's see here. Is this the... So as you've noticed, or not, let me point that out just in case. This is a general, kind of the newer experience Microsoft is going to. It's kind of a studio experience. So if you've been with Data Factory, Data Studio, those all are kind of getting away from this portally view and getting a more productized AI or more productized UI so that you can kind of see. But you do have your key models, endpoints, encryption, identity. You can restrict access to this, all those sort of fun things. So I'm going to go to the studio. And we're going to ignore that for now. So if you've been here before, you'll see a thing like this. If you haven't, it'll prompt you to create a model. We'll go around with that. So let's start first with models. So models are all the models that are at your fingertips to use today. So you can pick one and hit deploy. The thing that's going to be the biggest difference is the cost. So if we pull up the pricing, I think this is probably the biggest driver. GPT is going to be your more powerful models. However, they are also going to cost more. So if you can, and I believe also somewhere you get so many thousands of prompts for free as well. Maybe that was an old thing. Oh, maybe you do get 200 free credits, so you can use that here towards the models. But at the end of the day, when you're trying to look between GPT-4 and 3.5, why would you pick one over the other? Price is going to be a big one, and so is context or tokens. So we'll talk about those a little bit more when we get to it. You'll notice you're charged per 1,000 tokens in both prompt and completions. We'll go through both of those, but the long story short, price will probably drive your decision. You're going to more than likely probably want to go for a GPT Turbo just because it is the cheapest one right now that has the most features. So if we go to model deployments, this is what happens when you create a model. You can see I already have one 3.5 Turbo. We'll go ahead into completions, and we have these different dials here on the side. Let me see. Let me grossly blow that up. Cool. So you have temperature. It controls the randomness. So the higher that is, the more deterministic. The lowering the temperature, the model, the more repetitive and deterministic it will be. So you can think of it as like if it's at 0, it'll only answer questions that it knows 100% the answer to. If you turn it right all the way, it's going to do some more thinking and maybe potentially make something else. Max length tokens, or how many tokens you want to allow the model to spend on your individual prompt. Stop sequences are if you want it to stop at a desired point. So one I saw, for example, was like, give me a list of the top 50 places to visit in the world. And you might put a stop sequence of like 11. So it might give you a bulleted list like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it'll see 11 and stop. There's probably other reasons why you'd want that, but I feel like you could just ask the model to give you just the top 10. Maybe it's you get more and then you could ask it for more if you want to do, like maybe it's a way to do pagination. Top probabilities is similar to temperature. The more likely it is to give you and how often it wants to do that. Frequency penalty is going to reduce the frequency of a type of answer, and the persistence penalty or presence penalty is going to do the same thing. You can add or reduce the amount of presence, so it'll increase the likelihood of adding new topics. So you can crank that all the way up, so every answer is completely different. If you keep it lower, it'll try to keep answers similar. Pre-response text and post-response text are kind of like, you can have it come back and say like, pre-response, so before the response comes back, you can have it kick back like, thank you for using my service, here's your answer. Or post-response is like, come again, thanks, after the answer. So you can do those kind of things. We also have view code here. There's a few other options right out of the bat with a different API key. You can see your key here, add the URL. One thing you could also do, anything that can do a REST call is going to be able to work for this. You just have to be able to do that and add a token to it. So whatever your language of choice is, even though it's not listed here, like you can do Java, you can do Ruby, you can do Perl, anything that can make an HTTP call. You can just do straight up Postman. So you might come here and go like, what kind of samples do I want to do? Well, there's a lot of different ones right out of the box, which is pretty cool. So I can have it generate me an email, write a product launch email for you AI-powered headphones that are priced at $79.99. What should the subject line be? What should the body be? So this is just some preceding data. Might be also referred to sometimes as anchoring data. So we want to give it some context before it tries to answer. Because if we just give it nothing and say, what should the subject line be? It's going to be like, I don't know, something probably good. And it's not going to know what to do. The difference between chat and completions, we'll get to chat in a minute, but completions are each query or question is going to be completely separate. So if I ask it a question to generate me an email, and sometimes it's faster or slower than others. The green is what it just generated, and it's possibly still generating. Yeah. So it generated me a few options here. Don't miss out, best that. And then it's also some feedback here for a follow-up email. We can also do, I like the explain a SQL query, which is fun. So if you get some weird query at work that you don't know, signed up on March 2020 and watched at least 50 hours of streaming, which in the first 30 days. And then it also explains why somebody might be interested in this time period. So, but the reason I point this out is the email we just wrote and this query, this question, they don't have any connection to each other. So the model itself forgot that we even previously asked it something. So it's just going through here and answering it again as it's a clean slate. Kind of think of I don't know, something that just no memory. Your computer's maxed out. You have to clean up and delete something to make room to ask another question or have another app. It's kind of the same way. And this window does not like being blown up. Yeah, that's a little better. So we have GPT. This is our model again. The biggest difference is the past messages included. We can have as many as we want, up to, I believe, 20. What this does is it'll actually pass and keep the context of the memory and messages going. So if I ask, looks like I could speak to the model, which is cool. I'm in Omaha, Nebraska, so I can say, what is there to do in Omaha, Nebraska? So it's going to give me a list of things to do in Omaha, Nebraska. I can say, can you tell me about the sports teams? So we don't have any professional sports teams here. So it'll probably show, yep, our semi-pros and our college. So we also have these. And you notice, though, I didn't have to say, can you tell me about the sports teams in Nebraska? Omaha, Nebraska specifically. It was still able to say, okay, we're still in the context of Omaha. If I was having a real conversation with another human, I would obviously know we're talking about Omaha still. So that's what that does. It's pretty cool and allows you to do that. It'll tell you your input token progress. So message history was 374. That's the biggest downside of the more messages you include, the more context it's going to have to chunk through just to get you an answer back. System messages, 11. Max response is 800. And then the estimated max tokens are about here. There is also some of these you can do. So they do have some templates. So like if you want an IRS chatbot, continue that. What this does is it provides some anchoring data to pre-train the model. So it'll say like, hey, this is where you're coming from. And then you can ask it a question like, when do I need to file my taxes by? And then it'll give you the answer here. What this does is you can have a model actually you can do a prompt before you send in your model. So especially if you're doing, before you send your query, sorry. If you're doing this via an API or some sort of custom application, what you can do, and they actually have proven statistically that this makes it better. If you're trying to, for example, ask it to be like an insurance adjuster or some sort of like insurance quoter tool, if you put a phrase or like a little background scenario of like, you're a software developer and you're the best insurance quoter, we're building an app to create an insurance quote engine. It actually helps the models be a little bit more accurate if you give it a little bit of that background and a little bit of that persona prior to asking. Same thing here. We want to talk about taxes. We want to give it a little bit more data. We want to talk about eligibility claims. These are all things we want the model to be familiar with prior to asking it questions. The next thing is Dolly. This is pretty interesting. I haven't found one. This is the prompt they use to generate these. This imaged thing is going to be different every single time you come here. But it's fun to see. I think it's fun to visualize how prompts work and how prompt engineering works. So I can say like, create an Iowa sunset. I guess we'll do Nebraska. A Nebraska sunset. And it'll generate a single image. And who knows what that's going to look like because we were very vague. So it's a sunset. Now let's say have a tractor in the foreground and in the style of an oil painting. See what that does. It's kind of oil painting-y. It's a little bit streaky. We got a tractor. It's pretty good. And one fun thing, if you really want to get a visualization of prompt engineering, which is kind of what they call writing prompts, this is a real fun way to do it because I've seen, especially if you give people like a really specific goal of like, I want this super descriptive thing, or just keep adding to it of, say I want a man in a boat, and then keep adding more features to it and try to get them to generate a picture that will have the best accuracy to what you ask them. Because we had a group activity at work where we were doing that. It was like a man in a rowboat with like a waterfall in the background, and every single time they tweak the little thing, or even when they generate it again, and we can show that, the pictures sometimes are drastically different if you're not real descriptive about what you're looking for. And we'll see how good I was. It's all right. There wasn't a whole lot going on here, so. But yeah. We can keep generating. Let's try a third time. And we got that again. So now let's try to add a grain silo. See if this just completely screws up the whole picture, or. All right, and as you can see here, it did do a pretty good job, but we are losing some of our oil paintingness. Like, that is a very crisp tractor for an oil painting, if I would say so. Like, it's a little bit, I guess, oily over here, but I don't know. So it's kind of fun to keep asking it more questions and continue to build on a prompt and try not to lose any of the pieces that you had previously. The other thing we can have is data files. This is used if you want to do some sort of fine tuning or build your own data sets. You can upload a data set, and then you can actually use the create custom models here and have a base model type. Quotas, you can set quotas on all your things. So if you look here, DaVinci, I've hit 50% of my quota limit. Tokens per minute in Chat GPT, I have 100% of my quota limit, or the usage in the versus the quotas. So you can definitely make those up more or less. And then you can request more quotas to be raised if you want. And then content filters. You can use this. So we can have block lists here of different kinds. The other thing you can have is custom filters. So you have completions and prompts. You can have two different kinds. You can have the different categories and turn them on to low, high, or medium. What these are, I think the example that Microsoft gave was for violence. Say you're a hunting company or a company that sells sporting goods. You might allow people to be a little bit more, maybe vulgar isn't the right word, but have a little bit more violent undertone when they're talking about an axe to cut down a tree versus an axe to, I don't know, chop wood or, whatever axes are for. You can maybe describe one for cutting down like a bigger tree is going to be a little bit bigger of an axe versus a smaller one of like maybe sharpening some sticks or something like that. That might be a case where you're a little bit more loosey-goosey on what comes into the model. There's also some other things in here as well. The text of jailbreak attempt, materials, and material code. So you can turn those on or off. And then add a block list. And then review and finish. So yeah. One thing we didn't show quite yet was a piece in the chat here. You can actually add your own data. So what this does behind the scenes is you can actually use Azure Cognitive Search, and there's actually a few of these. Interesting. Sorry, this has changed even since I've looked at this last. Select the blob storage location. Whatever you want your index name. It looks like you can even index websites now, so that's new. Uploading files, Cosmos DB, blob storage, or AI search. So this is actually really cool because if you have, if you look at cognitive search can index a whole lot of things. If you go to Azure, I think it's offerings on Microsoft Learn. That's not what I think I want. It's not. There is an offering page that I am struggling to find at the moment where it'll tell you all the different things that cognitive search can index. And it's a lot. It's not just Microsoft products. There's different things in SAP. Search. Let's see. Is it here? Let's try some of these. If I can't find it. Here? No. Anyway, there's a bunch of products like SAP and out there. If you play with Azure Cognitive Search, you can see some of those. But yeah, and then you can also just put your stuff in a blob storage. One thing that will be interesting is if you don't go in here, and you might not, this is a big deal, your index schedule. So if you don't ever run this again, it'll only index your data once. It'll never run again. So if you add more data, remove data, nothing will ever change. So just make sure you make this your frequency that you care about. Azure Cognitive Search pricing is also fairly hefty. So I'd say try to make sure you can get as little as you can. There is a free tier, which is actually pretty great. The basic also isn't terribly expensive, but it just, if we go by month, it starts to get pretty pricey the more and higher tier you get. So you can typically get by most of your things on the free tier. I try to do that. The storage is not the storage of the files, I believe. It's the storage of basically your cache that you're using. So the higher tier, obviously, the bigger the cache you can use. And yeah. So you can go through here and pick different things, index it, and do that. So now we'll jump into what this app looks like. So as I said, you could do anything as long as it has an HTTP call. So in the Twillio example, we're using a logic app. That is just because I didn't really want to write much code. So I did the absolute bare minimum as possible. So what this is it's a post request that comes in to the URL. This is the URL we give Twillio. HTTP call. This is the post that actually calls out to Azure Open AI. So here's my Open AI instance, post, API key, and then all of the other parameters we talked about, those could all be adjusted as we make our HTTP calls. And then the reason we have to do a for each is the choices. So the answers that come back, you can have more than one come back. So if you want to give an option, but that always comes back as an array. So when we do serialize it, we're going to have to go through and we're going to send that response back. And it'll look something like this. What is Omaha known for? It's known for vibrant music and art scene. And then tell me more about the Heartland Developers Conference. And it talks about the one that's in Omaha. The next one we want to do, I had a lot of fun with this one, is an HTTP call to a logic app, which then uses Azure Translate to use Azure Open AI to then query a document. In this case, I used my printer manual to do that. So we can walk through that one. Let's pull up Postman. And let me do this real quick. Just making sure I have the right query pulled up. If not, we can do Postman is bright. I do not have that query. So what we can do is, let me look at, I can show what that looks like in Azure. And then we can make a Postman call to do it. And here's an example. This is asking how you do, sorry, I was trying to do the real example, but this will work. How do you change the language on the LCD screen of the printer? So the cool thing about this is the only document I have to grab information from is an English document. So what it'll allow you to do is you can essentially have a chatbot that can answer a question in any of the hundreds of languages that Azure has, only having one. So it'll come back and it tells you all the different steps to change the LCD screen on the printer. And it's even bulleted like it is in the manual itself with 1, 2, 3, 4, all the steps back in Spanish. I don't speak Spanish to say if it's 100% right. I Google translated some of them and it seemed like it was correct, but my Spanish is not the best. And what does that look like in practice, you might ask? Hopefully the app, not my Spanish, because that is not happening. So what we do is we do have our post here again. This one's a little bit different. We do have to initialize, some more variables. Let me pull that back up. So we initialize some variables here just to kind of keep track of everything and make life easier. This is the API call to our translate. So we'll see the translate. We're going from English to, or sorry, from what we're in to English. So we'll pass that key along. We're going to parse the JSON. And then we got to do some for eaches here. We want to not do that. We want to hit this button. As you can tell, I am a super great logic app wizard. Not at all. So what to do here is go ahead and make an HTTP call. If it's true, we're going to make the call out to Azure Open AI. So this means we got the answer back, and we want to make that call. So what this does is it'll call out Azure Open AI with the question. And this is in English, and it actually does the GPT index. So if you look right here, we're passing it both the key to our Azure Search Index as well as using GPT. Then we're making another HTTP call here to parsing this JSON. We're going to go ahead and go through here, making another call to convert it back to Spanish. So because that's what we got it in. You could probably detect the language and put it in a variable, and that way you don't have to be super, as long as you know your language is going to is English, you could probably put it in English and kick it back in whatever it came in. And then again, we're parsing that model, appending it to the string, and then we're returning that value at the end. So this is a very ugly way to do that. It's just, I threw it together for a talk one day. By no means the best. So it's just a proof of concept example. And yeah, so I hope I've helped instill why I think Azure Open AI is the best AI tool out there right now for just being able to pick up stuff and run with it. Some other examples that I think are really good, or if you want to go out and try it for yourself, I always recommend Azure's samples GitHub. One of my favorite samples out here is the Azure Search demo example. So if you're not familiar with AZD, I believe it's AZD, right? Yeah, AZD. You can actually deploy an entire application with a chat here, AZD up. What it does is it actually is a beneficiary kind of example that uses Azure Form Recognizer. Out of the box, it says it has Cosmos and SQL 2. It doesn't. I think this is just a picture of Azure Search that it can do that. If you do AZD up and deploy this sample, it'll give you a chat interface that'll be connected to fake benefit information. I have exported data from OneNote into PDFs and put it in here. And what it does is it'll use Form Recognizer to split it up page by page, to chunk it, to make it a little smaller. And then the cool part is if you ask it questions, it'll actually show you citations of where it grabbed it from. It'll actually show you explainability, which is a huge thing in AI today, that you want to be able to explain how and why your model thought and answered the way it did. That way, for defensibility or whatever reason, you want to know your model's doing whatever it is, so you can try to maybe rule out biases and make sure it's giving fairness for everything. It also can help you ask for follow-up questions. So you can ask questions. This model in particular is also locked down to be 100% on your data. So you can do that either by that the data we showed in like the chat model, where you can say like 100%, like don't don't answer anything that you don't know 100%, you could do that. There's a checkbox when you use your own data to say lock down to 100% only the data I'm feeding you. You can also tweak this example to say like answer with Chat GPT data as the secondary data. So you will need some of these things in order to work. The biggest caveat I've seen is when you do AZD up, it by default sometimes likes to pick a region that does not have Chat or OpenAI in it. So just make sure that one, OpenAI is allowed for your account, and two, that the region you pick is one that has OpenAI in it. And it'll deploy a service for you. The other thing that's really cool about this is if you want to lock this down behind auth 2, it's an app service, so you can hook it up fairly easily to an app registration and have AD off on it too. Yeah. This is a great example if you want to just play with this. It's super simple to get going, and it's really also a complex example too. So if you want to dig in and really try to figure out what all's going on and build your own sample from there too. It's a great getting started, and it's a great to help move you in the right direction. Yeah. Thanks for joining my festive talk. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to reach out. I am Alec Harrison, and I hope you have a happy holidays. See ya.